If you're not already subscribed to this YouTube channel, go ahead and hit the subscribe button now, along with the bell icon so you can be notified whenever a new video is posted. And if you're already subscribed, check and make sure that YouTube hasn't unsubscribed you. And of course, be sure to give the video a like as well as share it on your social media. The white supremacists hate that. And now, the Sunday address. The subject of this evening's address already made the rounds some months back, but in light of what all happened with Essence Fest and how it demonstrates how the Tethers can't agree on anything except that they're going to try to rip us off and hijack our lineage to prop themselves up, we gotta speak on this. And I would be remiss not to tip my hat to Sister Lisa Cabrera for helping to bring this issue right back to the surface again. If you haven't checked it out on her channel, you should. Now, for those of you who may not have heard, earlier this year, the African Union decided that the theme for this year was going to be 2025 Year of Reparations. And it was pretty obvious that you had these guys calling themselves jumping on our bandwagon and trying to hijack our issue, and first thing they wanted to do was make a beeline straight for the United States, because that's what you do when you're the African Union fighting for reparations in Africa. You go straight to the US. You don't go to the British, you don't go to the French, you don't go to the Spanish, you don't go to the Germans, you don't go to the Dutch. You go straight to the United States, which had one colony over there, Liberia, as opposed to the other European powers which had the lion's share of them. When I first came across this story, what I saw was mostly in the context of what was clearly a thinly veiled feminist scheme. This was some months ago, but I saw the mention of gender and immediately looked and said, okay, I see what y'all are on. We can be disgusted, but not surprised. The very people who have done absolutely nothing for our reparations claim, now here they are dragging their behinds over here, trying to sniff around and see what they can get. The African Unions had what they call regions, but they decided that they were going to add a sixth region, and this region was going to be the diaspora. In other words, everywhere outside of Africa. This is the African Union pushing a Nigerian scam. They're trying to claim that the African diaspora, particularly here in the United States, are somehow under their political sovereignty, and that they're nominating themselves to speak for us on reparations. But of course, as they see it, reparations are supposed to be in their pockets. We're the ones who made the term reparations relevant. And now you have the very people who have done nothing for that issue, but have done everything to undermine us, now trying to use it as a buzzword. What a joke, though not a funny one. As I said last week, you can't build a great civilization abroad until you first learn to build one at home. All of this sixth region crap is trying to get the Africans who fled to be advocates for the crooks back in the home countries. Of course, it stops being funny when you consider that they've made trying to hijack reparations their entire agenda for 2025. When I saw this earlier this year, they had it wrapped up in some silly gender talk, reparations and gender warring. The two don't mix, but it just goes to show the total dysfunction. Speaking of which, when you check out the African Union's 6th region website, almost all of their images are of non-black people, or heavily feature non-black people front and center. They always have to make sure they got non-black folks in there. This is how you know who the real audience for this reparations scheme of theirs actually is. It's a white audience they're trying to appeal to. And don't underestimate that there's white power behind this garbage. Remember the so-called Black News Channel? That thing was the brainchild of a white man and was funded by an Asian billionaire, Shahid Khan. But they knew that they couldn't be the face of it, so they got some front Negroes to be their front men and front women for it. That was just another sock puppet organization too, just like Black Pac and She the People and other dummy front groups. This is the kind of thing that Tethers do when they're trying to appeal to white venture capitalists and white donors. You have to make it clear that this is a project that would be totally friendly to their interests. If they're coming sniffing to the United States under the feeble guise that they're here for some sort of reparations claim that they think the US owes them, then why in the world is it that they're trying to put together a proposal that is going to appeal to the beneficiaries of that exact same U.S. colonization? Make it make sense. And that's why you have them going out of their way to make sure that they don't mention foundational Black Americans at all. This is meant to be a counter effort to what we're doing. None of their scam artists who are fronting for this comes anywhere near us because they know better than that. They don't want any of the white money interests that they're trying to appeal to think that they're actually serious. Not that there was ever a chance of that. And without us, this is nothing but just another Nigerian email scam. Without us, it can't be legitimate. Be it CARICOM or the African Union, they all have to come begging bowl in hand to the United States. But they don't come making demands. Instead, they come saying they want to partner with the very people who they want reparations from. A partnership with them? They did everything they could to separate themselves from us, and they're still hard at work at that. That's how you know it ain't legit. Africa's leaders have specifically singled us out to be insulted and denigrated. That's what they've been doing up until now. And now that their scams and schemes have totally failed to benefit them, now they want to call themselves elbowing their way into our political struggle, but not to help, but instead to give cover to white power in an effort to undermine us and prevent us from getting what we're owed. It's just another clumsy front for some tethers to try to bestow legitimacy on themselves, to try to go to white power and say, well, we're doing this on behalf of these black Americans over here. Well, you know, everybody, but including them, mostly them. So that's why you got to deal with us. But then again, white power set them up to do exactly that. They have absolutely no authority or legitimacy to speak for us. They have no sovereignty over us. We did not ask for their help. We don't want it. And they have never offered anything. They spent over a century saying that they are not us and that we aren't them and that they're better than us and they don't have anything in common with us. So be it. Everyone must stand on their own now. And we see how long it's taken them to come running. This is just another Nigerian scam. I repeat that because that's what I want you to remember. Not that it came out of Nigeria necessarily, but that it comes from the same mentality. At no point did they come to us and say, you know what, we've been screwing up for the last century. Let's sit down. Let's go ahead and iron out the differences here. We owe you guys an apology. We turned our backs on you. We spat in your faces. We owe you guys land and resources because we're finally ready to do some honest business. But then again, when you look at Africa, they haven't even done that for their own people. And some of the little shills who they've had running around trying to pimp this little scheme online, these guys, they're ridiculous. They're sitting here bragging saying that the UN is backing this. At best, only rhetorically, but in reality, not backing it at all. The UN won't even back calling the US out for its systematic brutality against foundational black Americans. When has that professional do-nothing society ever done anything for us? Secondly, the UN is run by the same colonial and white supremacist powers that we have always fought against and that these tethers have always been bowing to. And it just goes back to what I saw months ago. Before it's all over, you better believe that these guys, considering that they're trying to appeal to white power, it won't be long before they're pushing stuff about immigrants, feminists, LGBT. That's why they shoehorned all the gender stuff in there back earlier this year. They're not going to be saying black or even African before it's all over. They're going to be describing political categories, same as the white left does. They always sneak that mess in. They start off pretending like it's going to be about black people if nothing else, and then they immediately bait and switch to what it's really going to be about, because that's the real audience they're trying to reach. And one last thing. You sound crazy talking about getting anyone a seat at the table in the UN when African nations aren't even on the UN Security Council. And the Biden administration said they didn't want any African nations on the Security Council if they had veto power, because giving African nations veto power on the Security Council, that would only make the Security Council dysfunctional. Yeah, it's not dysfunctional right now, right? You can't claim that the UN backs you when they openly oppose you being in a position to call hands. This is the powers that be trying to get out in front of what we're doing. That's what this is. The African nations leaders are acting as meat puppets for this garbage. They tried that phony congressional hearing on reparations a few years back where they had a parade of tethers and bootlicks and a few alleged FBAs who were all saying in unison that reparations shouldn't be cash. That's what that whole charade was about. It was political theater meant to platform people who would say the message loud and clear. Oh, reparations doesn't have to be money. In fact, it should be anything but money. That's the message that they wanted to give to the masses. And then afterwards, they had the San Francisco branch of the NAACP pushing the same line, but you better believe that the national leadership for the NAACP believes the same thing. The firestorm of controversy that came on those guys, and you didn't have the national leadership saying, ooh, our San Francisco branch out there is a little off code, ain't they? There's a reason for that. Openly opposing cash reparations. That's what the NAACP does. That's their policy. Though they did want San Francisco to put money into where their city headquarters was at, the NAACP branch headquarters on Fillmore, they did want money for that. They've done everything they can to redefine reparations as being housing vouchers or school vouchers or some other useless and meaningless token that doesn't put money in our pockets. And what they see is that hasn't worked. So now they're trying to call in big guns, or rather big mouths. They're going to triple down on bringing in tethers, Nigerian scammers, and foreign flags. and they're going to give them a platform to claim that they are leading the reparations fight now, same way that the white media gave a platform to Big Bird and those clowns over at Cobra, letting them falsely claim that they were the longest standing reparations advocacy group and ain't produced squat on the subject in 40 years, no movement on it whatsoever, haven't held any politicians' feet to the fire. Oh, and speaking of Cobra, when you go to the African Union's website talking about the theme for this year, or as I call it, the theme for the scheme, well, would you look at that? Guess who the very first group is that the AU refers to as part of their so-called resources for this scam? They list Cobra. See, they're not concerned about actually getting reparations. This happens to be the same old gang of bootlick shills, tethers, sellouts, fakers, frauds, and phonies who white power has all of them together, a team of losers, and is like, you all need to go ahead and make as much noise as possible. They know that there's absolutely no way in hell that they can even attempt to push a scam like this unless they have a few people who they can claim to come from our lineage who they'll say, well, these guys are on board with it, so they're all on board with it. That's the lie that they're going to try to be pushing. It's the usual suspects. The same creeps who we've been warning you about for several years now, the very same people who have done absolutely nothing for our justice claim, but the white media loves them. The clown who refused to even ask Kamala Harris about reparations, and yet these Nigerian scammers, they feel only too confident having these guys as part of their little scheme. I mean, this is just a homecoming of the enemy within, isn't it? All of these elements of controlled opposition. That's how you know this stuff is not just sprouting out of the ground. Career turncoats are trying to validate each other. The African nations who refuse to join hands with us haven't discovered religion. They haven't changed their stripes any more than the misleaders in the Caribbean have. They have done absolutely nothing for their people, so what the hell makes anyone think they're going to try to do anything for ours? CARICOM has been chattering about reparations for a long time now, and they made it very clear that their reparations claim has nothing to do with us. And the occasional errant chatter that the African Union or some of their leaders over there might have made about reparations, they didn't even pretend as if there was some sort of connection with us. Until now. What we're seeing is no different than when you have some Africans claiming that Muammar Gaddafi is the king of Africa's leaders. Remember that one? Africans are constantly putting non-black people on a pedestal over there. The people from Africa are not on code, not as a group they aren't. They haven't been able to get their own so-called leaders to speak up for them, and very few of them are willing to speak up for themselves. This is a sock puppet movement, nothing more, but you need to be aware of it. This is white power's African puppets who they're giving a platform to falsely claim that they're talking for us, and you'll have some bootlicks and shills and sellouts who'll be cheesing for the cameras and saying, yeah, we all on the same page. See, this is Black Folks United. This is the reason why Pan-Africanism was always damned to fail, because the African so-called leaders and too many of the population over there have been on team white supremacy. Why do you think the same white supremacists who dominated that place and colonized it have been able to live in the same mansions that they had during colonialism and live off the fat of the land, even while they're only 5% of the population, if that? And the Africans have not risen up and retaken their real estate or their natural resources or anything else. Why do you think that hasn't happened? They laid down and surrendered a long time ago. And now the exact same people who have put no resources into anything for their own people and who refuse to join hands with us are now making common cause with our enemies for the purpose of stopping black empowerment. Let's be clear. The same people who you see today calling themselves trying to speak for you and me are the descendants of the people who collaborated in the slave trade and who became allies to the Europeans during colonialism. They aren't owed anything. They have no place being here. They made a deal with the devil. They don't get to complain because the devil didn't stop being evil. Their goal is to beg up on some more money from the people whose behinds they've been kissing the whole time. And what will Africa's corrupt leaders do if they get any money? They'll do the same thing that they've done with all the other money that these white supremacists have given them. Waste it. Africa and the Caribbean's leaders have shown us their backsides for a century, and then for the last 3 generations, they've been sending a torrent of tethers here to spit in our faces. And now they're trying a last-ditch effort to prop themselves up at our expense. The Africans have problems, I agree, and 99% of them are totally self-inflicted. We reached out to them, they made it abundantly clear that they had nothing but contempt for us, and now they're on their own. I don't wish them ill. I don't wish any of the Africans ill, believe it or not. I simply say that we will support them the exact same way and to the exact same extent that they have always supported us. The same corrupt scumbags who ran Africa into the ground are trying to put their grimy hands in our pockets. The same people who wanted to come over here and try to cosplay as us. They do everything they can to try to palm themselves off as being one of us. And that's where the whole Pan-Africanism thing helped them out with their scam. Because they could say, oh, well, we're all just flat blackness when you think about it. And it really doesn't matter if it's Philadelphia or if it's Mali. It doesn't matter if it's Baltimore or Burkina Faso. It's all black, right? Support black businesses. But these black businesses don't support foundational black anything. Supporting a black business isn't enough. What matters is whether or not they have an oppositional ideology to white supremacy, and the Tethers and the African leaders do not. And these clowns have the nerve to talk about the UN. The exact same African Union who didn't bring any case before the UN or the ICJ for black Americans, who didn't even have the decency to make an international case for their own people, but they were only too eager to go to the mat for the Palestinians because that happens to be a sanctioned cause from the white left. Changing the balance of power right here in the United States, the Rome of its day, putting the scales on the side of justice for foundational black Americans, that changes the balance of power. That threatens white supremacy. Which is why the African Union isn't going to do that. We've been trying to deal with our problems, and the crooks in Africa's government, they've been sending their tethers here nonstop to undermine us. And then you got trash like Richelieu Dennis and Caroline Wanga who come here and declare open war on us. And we're going to keep pinpointing these tether schemes. They hate it when we do that, because the more we do it, the more the word gets out and the harder it becomes for the tethers to hide. What the Richelieu Dennises and the Caroline Wangas and others are terrified of is foundational black Americans taking our $1.5 trillion in wealth and not putting it into the pockets of these sellouts. In other words, defunding the tethers. That's what they're terrified of. People need to start checking paperwork on who you do business with. That's the reason why Richelieu Dennis was able to go ahead and have his little company that he immediately sold to white interests like Unilever. They use us as seed capital for their own little businesses, and then what happens is they go finding some white power broker that they go ahead and sell that to. What they're actually doing is they're selling an audience. They sit there and do that, and next thing you know, black folks are sitting here thinking that they're still dealing with a black business when they stopped being black anything a long time ago. And if it's a tether in charge of it, it was never black to begin with. When you got some Negro calling themselves smiling up in your face saying, do business with me or vote for me, you're supposed to ask where their folks are from. It's time to start putting people on the hot seat and stop being bashful about it. It's way past time we started doing some cultural gatekeeping. And for those of you who are black immigrants and consider yourselves to be B1, you need to be doing the exact same thing. Weakening the tethers inside their own homes is a key component of breaking their backs. Make it where they can't escape being put on the spot. Make it where these guys are feeling the heat constantly, especially from places that they didn't expect it. When traitors like Caroline Wanga can just run around free as a bird bragging that her family took part in the East African slave trade, and she's allowed to act as if she did nothing wrong, and neither Kenya nor the Kenyans themselves demand that she be held accountable, then you have presented yourselves to the world as paper tigers, and you make yourselves targets for anybody who wants to mistreat you. And then people got the nerve to wonder why it is that you got so many of the Asians coming in there, whipping the Africans and doing everything else. Of course they don't fear any repercussions. They know that they're dealing with a group of people who gave absolutely no response and who inflicted no consequences for the greatest single crime in human history. Now, if the greatest crime in human history goes completely and thoroughly unanswered and unpunished by the victims of that crime, when they have the power, allegedly, to punish the people who did it, well, that tells them, hell, there's nothing that these guys are going to object to, so why show any respect for them? And yet, when you look at the African Union's promotional material for this scam, who do you see standing around? Now, we're going to start clearing these tethers out of the positions that they've occupied. Every political office, every university chair, every corporate position, any place they have in finance, media, or government is going to be considered occupied territory and illegitimate. White power chose these tethers. White power put millions of dollars behind each and every one of them. Black people didn't choose Richie Torres. White power did, including the Israelis. Black people didn't choose Barack Obama. Tom Daschle and the Democratic Party leadership did that. Black voters didn't even support Obama until after the New Hampshire primary back in 2008. Black people certainly didn't choose Kamala Harris. The California political machine did. That's why I began banging the drum against her in 2017 with my video, The Deadly Deception of Kamala Harris. It was obvious she was being groomed for a presidential run, and as we all know, she ran for the presidency twice and lost because foundational black Americans refused to support her. And the same goes for these tethers in the white media. So these tethers are inventions of white power, and it's not just in the US, white supremacy is global. So of course you look at Africa, and you're going to find home central for bootlicks. But white power isn't doing it because it likes them. White power has chosen and funded these tethers to leapfrog us as a way to install an artificial misleadership class, one that will have not even a sentimental attachment to us. A gang of disloyal and corrupt kleptocrats who have absolutely no loyalty to their people in Africa, and in the United States they spend full time deranging and undermining our own internal politics. But what some of us have finally realized is they can only do it if we allow it. Delineation is the first part of decoupling ourselves from these backstabbers. You gotta put a name on who's doing it so people know who they are, but we can't do all your homework for you. You have to be a discerning person. Ask questions. Who is this person who wants you to give them your money or your vote? I've always taught you that your wallet is supposed to be a convent. Only the pure of heart is supposed to be able to get into it. And nobody gets into a convent without undergoing a rigorous background check first. The tethers are in league with white supremacy, so they should be considered no different. You would never do business with or vote for a white supremacist. You would never let some white supremacists call themselves speaking for you or speaking on our issues without shouting them down. If David Duke sets up a business in your neighborhood, how long would you allow it to remain there? If he called himself trying to sell you something, how much money would you spend with him? If you saw a David Duke or a Richard Spencer or any other white supremacist trying to interact with you in any way, would you just go along with it? Or would your opposition be immediate and overwhelming? The tethers are agents of white supremacy. They are open enemies of our community. They should get the same treatment as any other element of white supremacy. It's time for the misleaders of Africa to go back home. Whatever scam they're hoping to pull, it's not going to work here because this isn't their home, and the tethers need to be shut down. But what they won't be doing is acting as spokespeople for us. They've had at least 50 plus years to mention reparations and haven't done it once. You had South Africa's so-called president in the White House not long ago. Did he take that opportunity to mention reparations? Of course not. None of them ever do when they come to the U.S. This is not about benefiting Africans, by the way. This is about corrupt scumbags on another continent who have allied themselves with white power to try to usurp our position and our justice claim to benefit themselves. They're just here to do white power's bidding. Because all the little ploys that the white supremacists have tried here to try to undermine us and derail us hasn't worked. They tried to redefine who reparations should apply to, and that failed. They tried to redefine what reparations should be, and that failed. So now they're trying to redefine who is to be the leading voice in the issue, and to install their meat puppets to say what they want. By the way, has anyone heard the African Union or any of their shills say that reparations must take the form of cash payments, no excuses? Nowhere does their website actually say cash. Instead, they just use the word reparations. Now, we know that in practical terms, what they want is white power to give them some amount of money, but it will only be the same crumbs that white power always gives to those preening, strutting sellouts over there. When it comes to reparations, these bootlicks need to butt out, and if they can't take a hint, then they need to have a boot put to their butts. All right, now one final point. We've had tons of people, mostly tethers, anti-black white supremacists, and empty-headed Negroes who have never lifted a finger for black empowerment in their entire pathetic lives, try to tell us that reparations will never become a reality. It won't happen ever. These are also the exact same people who said that reparations would never become a serious political issue either. They carpet bomb our timelines and comment sections with those talking points. They call into people's live streams to say reparations is never going to happen. You need to give up on it. And yet these exact same tethers don't do that with Africa. Do you see any of them saying the African Union needs to stop? The Caribbean tethers aren't bringing that same energy to CARICOM and telling them that reparations is a joke and it's not going to happen, and stop asking white power for crumbs, etc. And these African tethers don't do that with the African Union. They don't have any criticism for their home country's reparations demands, even the ones that are clearly a scam. Now, why is that? Why is it that when a few million foundational black Americans demand reparations, these tethers are all in an uproar about it, and they're ready to bite your arm off to tell you that it's a pipe dream, ain't gonna happen, you're crazy to be even talking about it, you need to just let it go. But then, when the alleged entire continent of Africa talks about reparations, however insincerely, these same critics suddenly don't have anything to say. They're not telling their own people, you just need to give up on it, what are you guys talking about, this is crazy talk. And you know who else isn't saying anything? Anti-black racists like Douglas Murray. These white supremacist mouthpieces, they're real quiet about the African Union doing this. Shouldn't they be the main ones whose pinheads are exploding about this and saying, oh my God, now the entire continent of Africa is saying reparations? Instead, they're looking and they feel comforted by this somehow. Reparations is only a problem. Reparations is only a threat if we're doing it. See, the enemy recognizes a real threat from a phony nothing. These corrupt crooks in Africa and the Caribbean were set up and propped up by white power. They're controlled opposition. We're not. That's why they're not making a fuss to deliberately exclude the colonizers living among them from their phony reparations talk. Nobody talks about the internal contradictions of their so-called demands because it's not meant to go anywhere other than to stop us. It's meant to give them cover for that. You see them going out of their way to include the very people who are the colonizers because it's just another Nigerian scam. These are the people who they want the money from. They started off giving insane chatter about gender, and they've just gotten more deranged from there. When it comes to Africa's corrupt misleaders and the tether mouthpieces that they send over here, we're not going to stop at merely calling them out. We're not going to stop our efforts until we shut them down and run them out. They're not going to be allowed to set up shop here and become some sort of fifth column as they've done all over the world. When we call them out, we make it where they can't hide amongst us. They don't get to slither amongst us and then try to lay claim to our moral struggle, because that's what this is really about. Sending in a bunch of corrupt, immoral turncoats to try to put on the good offices of our struggle and our history. We don't allow that. When we call them out, we make it where it's impossible for them to do so. And we face them with an existential threat. White power is propping them up. White power is the ones that's presenting them to us and the ones trying to legitimize them. But if they can't complete their mission of successfully misleading us astray, taking money from us to fuel an anti-black machine, if they fail at that, then they know there's absolutely nothing to stop white power from throwing them away. And when it comes to us, we're not going to feed them either. And as far as I'm concerned, the only non-monetary form of reparations that I'm willing to accept would be the complete and thorough punishment of every single one of these creeps who have ever tried to undermine us, speak against us, or call themselves speaking for us. Now that would be justice. Good evening, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors: Darren Nooks, Black Rye, Bobby Ross, Donald Owsley, and Alyssa Boutte. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.